My near-death experience took place on an airplane. The airplane didn't crash, but all of the oxygen went out of the cabin. And so the gas masks or the oxygen masks fell down from those cabinets in the ceiling. And I was traveling with, at that time, this was about over 20 years ago in 2000, I was traveling with 2 younger children and just an infant, like a 4-month-old infant. And so there was so much terror because you don't always, when the gas masks fall down, you would think that there will be one for everyone. But when you're traveling with an infant in your arms, there may not be a gas mask for that extra person. So the panic really started up pretty big. And I was able to get a gas mask, or an oxygen mask, excuse me, from the seat in front of me, which for some reason was empty. I put that on the infant. But what happened at that moment was we were forced to make an emergency landing. There wasn't any oxygen in the cabin. And I had not really been a very spiritual person at that time. I was a Catholic. I was very mainstream as a mother, and like I was a soccer team coach, and just very, very mainstream. And so what happened really surprised me, and I didn't understand until later how an NDE or an NDE-like experience, which is sort of more what I think I've had, can change and alter the entire course of your life. And in my case, we had the gas mask or the oxygen mask on, and suddenly, as I thought we were surely, going to crash or die, or the oxygen would suffocate us all, the entire cabin filled with a golden light. And I had the sense that angels were holding the plane up. And this was unique to me because I didn't really think along those terms at that point. I just had this enormous sense that God was there. And again, that wasn't a term I would have used or even thought of. And then I had this very, very interesting experience where, they talk about your life flashing before you, but it doesn't necessarily, at least in my experience, it didn't necessarily flash as a slideshow of my life. It's almost like I experienced my entire life again, all at once, in the course of a few seconds. And what this showed me, this first start of this opening or this awareness or this change, was how amazing every aspect I had of my life had been, even the horrible parts, right? So we eventually were able to make an emergency landing. Eventually, we didn't have to use the masks. We were okay, but that incident, that near-death experience of thinking like not only was I going to die, but my children were going to die, and there was really nothing that could be changed or shifted, and then it was. I did not come out of the plane the same person. What I noticed, and here's what I think is interesting, is sometimes people will have NDEs like in a hospital where they'll actually, their heart will stop beating for a while, or they'll be in an operation and they'll see themselves lifting off from their body. And I didn't have that experience, but the changes that happened afterwards, again, it changed the entire course of my life and also the entire way I understood reality. When I got off the plane, I was instantly psychic and spiritually awake. And I don't know at what point that happened. This idea of I saw God, or I saw consciousness, or I was consciousness in that moment. I don't know when the change happened, but suddenly I was reborn into a new being at at the moment that from the rest of my life on. And I would say, this was actually pretty terrible, because you get off the plane, everyone's like, what happened? and you're a completely different person. So that requires that much of the life you had previously has to go away or be let go of, or will just release on its own, which is what happened.
So you also mentioned being instantly psychic, so like from one moment to the other. How does that work, and did it at any point freak you out? Because it sounds like it wasn't gradual at all.
Yeah, I mean, I had always been incredibly in tune intuitively, and even as a medium as a child, but it was always kind of simmering in the background. It wasn't something that was allowed in my family or discussed. And when I got off the plane, you hear that expression, it's like you show up, you're not wearing any skin. It's just like I was so open. I could just look at a person and read them, or I could understand how a situation was going to be, or I could connect with spirit. Everything just opened. And I actually believe now that this is our true reality, that we're absolutely open all the time. But society tells us we're not, and for some reason we believe that. But it was a big problem, actually. I've sometimes talked about the time after, where it was the dark night of the soul for a lot of, maybe 4 years. I didn't fit into my old life. I had all these new awarenesses and all this new understanding, and nobody that I knew at that time understood what I was talking about. Just like, what happened to her? She's lost it. And this was back in 2000, so this was not a time when, like nowadays, NDEs or psychic abilities or channeling or these other things are in the mainstream, but back then they were not. So it was quite a journey of just hanging on to this new reality and getting used to that this was how it was going to be from then on. Yeah.
And tell me about the dark night of the soul. Like, how did you navigate through that? Because I hear very often from people that have had NDEs that all of a sudden, indeed, their life does not fit anymore, right? You go back to a life that doesn't seem to resonate anymore. And there's so many pieces where we think, well, this is just it, right? This is the job that I have, this is the partner that I have, this is the life I've built. It's incredibly difficult to think, well, I need to start everything from zero, and even if I would, where would I even start from? What would I do? Mm-hmm. So walk me through how this process was for you.
Yeah, so interesting thinking back. Well, some of the other things that happened right after this experience, one of the big things was that my father died just maybe a month or so later. And so those experiences, the NDE experience and then the death of my father, were really, really closely timed. And so that sort of expanded it or made it more, because I was dealing with his death. He had a long illness. I was dealing with his death from the perspective of infinite soul, as opposed to, or from the perspective of mediumship, as opposed to where I had been just a few months earlier, the idea of loss and grief, and you'll never see that person again. And I had an incredibly spiritual experience in his passing. I was there in the moments shortly before he died. So that was actually a tremendous gift that came actually from having the NDE experience, having this awakening, and then having this death sort of partner right up with that timing. After that, you could say it was the grief. You could say it was even some kind of depression. I don't really think that's what it was. I just remember for 4 years kind of wandering around lost, this not fitting in. And you know, I was raising actually 4 children at that time, and just feeling so confused. Like, what do you do when you're raising 4 children and you realize like none of your experience is working? And I have heard, I know Pema Chodron, the Buddhist monk, she was a mother, and I can't remember her story exactly, but she had the same experience of needing to walk away from that role or that identity in order to fulfill her mission or task. And I also believe Byron Katie, the author, who's pretty well known, she had this similar, like, the mother role no longer fit, the mainstream role no longer fit. And yet here you have these, you know, anyone who's a parent or mother knows, like, you have these massive nonstop duties that you can't just shirk. It's your responsibility. So for 4 years, it was kind of like, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? And eventually I got divorced and just started over. It was pretty hard. It was pretty rough, but that was what needed to happen based on the new understanding. Yeah.
And for anybody that's navigating, you know, feeling the way that you were feeling during that time, so just feeling very lost, not quite sure what's not right. And as you said, if you're a parent, those duties do not stop. So you have to keep going, as well as figure out what it is that you're missing and what it is that you need. Would you have any advice for anybody that is navigating and feeling lost as you were?
I think it's really important to find helper people that are just going to show up to assist you in this, in your new understanding. And it's important to allow them into your life and allow them to sort of show you some new ways of thinking about things. I met shortly after, and these weren't that significant on their own, but when you add them up, they created this sort of safety net for. I met a person who was a hypnotherapist, and he took me through some hypnotherapy. I was actually just helping him practice. It was just a friend, but in the journeying in hypnotherapy, I discovered I can journey like mad, like I'm an excellent journeyer. And so that experience kind of unlocked a key of like, well, how am I going to deal with this? Oh, I can journey, I can meditate. I didn't know that before. That was very, you know, in the mainstream. I also found a therapist who did EMDR or EF. And that really released the trauma of the experience. Almost the first time, you know, you do this eye movement desensitization, and that just, the first time it just shifted it. It was like the whole trauma of the experience was gone. It didn't change the awakening trauma, I guess, or gift. I'm not sure which you'd call it, but the trauma of the plane experience just dropped out. And then other people, I met some really creative artists, people who were dealing with some sort of spiritual themes, and just like I wasn't really seeking because I didn't know who to go to, especially where I lived. It was very conservative, but these interesting people just started showing up. And I think for a person who's facing this, like, trust the universe is going to bring you helpers, potentially in really weird, strange packages that you don't expect, and just allow them to assist you. Just begin to accept the gifts that are coming your way.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because very often I think the universe just gives us what we want and what we need, right? Or what we need in order to get to the next step on our path. But so often we don't see those signs.
Yeah.
Because they come in the form of people, they come in the form of challenges, of opportunities, and it's still up to us to lean into those.
Yeah, I I think sometimes the universe must feel not frustrated, but it's continually helping us, and we're like, I need help, and then we're like, we just sent you 70 helps. Why didn't you take any of them? Because you were on your phone. What? like you just distracted and don't notice it, or you think it has to come in a certain way, which it doesn't. It can come lots of ways. Yeah.
So, because of your experience with the plane and thinking that you're going to crash and you're going to die, I'm wondering, have you flown after that, and what's your relationship with flying on planes now?
Do you know lorazepam? It's anti-anxiety. It's no. It was really hard. It was really hard, and I actually don't use any drugs or any alcohol, but I do when I'm flying. I'll take something to just kind of zone out. But so there's that. But also I decided, or I really have begun to trust, like when it's it should have been my time to go back in 2000, but it wasn't. And so this idea, when it's our time, it's our time. And we don't need to worry about that because we're not in charge of that. I suppose if you're doing, really, really extreme, dangerous sports, or then you're sort of gambling a bit with what your time is or not. But in general, we don't have any control. And there's a great relief in knowing that it's beyond our ability to. We are not in charge of the universe, and that's a great relief, actually.
And that's so true. And I also wanted to talk to you more about mediumship, because you mentioned you were instantly psychic after this incident, but you also said that you sort of had connections with that when you were a child. So what was that like? And was it also something that was accepted in your family and by your parents? Was it encouraged, or was it seen as like, no, you must have been dreaming, those things don't happen?
Well, it wasn't accepted by the family at all, and it was in fact sort of restricted or said it wasn't real. I mentioned to you earlier, I lived in Norway, and I lived in Oslo, and where we lived as a child, I was pretty young. We lived right next to a pretty big cemetery of some kind. And so as a child, for some reason, I was allowed to just go into the cemetery as my playground, right? Or just go, you could just go walk around. And I did that. And as a child, it was like a party in the cemetery. It was like filled with people, filled with spirit people. And so I was there daily, sort of with my spirit buddies or whoever was there. And, the first few times I would come home and say, oh, there were these people there. After that, I just stopped telling what I was experiencing. But I never had any unfriendly, I've almost never had any unfriendly spirit activity in my life. So either, I'm not sure why that is, but that was there. And then after the NDE, it really kind of shifted. So, there's so many psychic abilities. Mediumship is one of them. Healing might be, and energy healing might be another one. But for me, the things that started to open up more than as a child, where I began to have clairvoyance, where I can see visions or journey and do visioning, shamanic style journeying or meditative journeying. And that was very big. I would just know how things were going to happen. And the biggest thing for me that opened, it was channeling and writing, where I began to channel spiritual teachings in writing. And that didn't start, 2000 was the NDE. Around 2004, I started channeling and writing. And that is where I think like my biggest contribution to maybe spiritual understanding comes through the channel, messages I've channeled over those last years. So I think that would be probably the biggest gift that opened, or the biggest new thing that opened up as part of the awakening.
And a lot of people come to you, I'm guessing, to be in touch with loved ones that are no longer here. What are some of the common themes or questions that you usually get?
Yeah, actually for me, I don't really offer that as something that I do anymore. I think I think that's an excellent question, and I'll just speak to what I used to do. I don't do that now, but often what will happen is when you are in touch with your spirit guides, they're often come in position sort of around you so that it's really easy to understand who's standing where. And for me, I'm not the person who sees an apparition necessarily when I'm with a person that's wanting to have touch with their departed beloved, but often, so my guides will be behind me or to the side of me, and then I will be able to see their guides in some positions behind them. And then there's usually a place, for me it's usually to my right, behind them, where the departed will start to show up. And the departed, as they work with me, are very, if your grandmother was a farmer, she's going to come in her farming outfit so that I can know, like, there's a lady farmer here, and then they'll be like, that's my grandma. Or they'll come with specific objects, like a special necklace or something that's really known to the person. So they're really working to communicate visually or through their actions so that you can't miss the message. And it's interesting because sometimes the departed will be people that are really known to the person, and sometimes they'll be more ancestral, like the person won't even know, or maybe met them when they were a baby. And even those ancestors will come forward saying, look, we're paying attention, or we're here. I did have quite a few really strange experiences with apparition form right after the NDE. Now I'm remembering, I was at the swimming pool with a bunch of kids, and I looked over and I saw this man I sort of vaguely knew in a suit or in business dress standing at the pool, and I just thought, that's so weird. I didn't know he came here, and why is he in a suit? That's just seemed strange. And then we left, and then we discovered later he had just passed. So he was doing some kind of showing up to see the places that he'd been before. I have had many incidents where I can look at a person and just know, like, they're not here long. And that could be young person, old person. I usually wouldn't say anything to them, obviously, but it's just, there's this sort of knowing, like they're not fully here for some reason. They're already in another realm.
Are there signs? Because, sorry.
That's okay.
If you can see that, then I'm thinking, way before we pass on, there must be some signs or preparations, if you will. So do you know if there's anything like when you have, I don't know, a couple of months or so to live, that is there something happening that actually gives you the vision of, oh, this person is not going to be here long?
Yeah, I see it just as their energy is not on the earth plane. But I think if you're the person who's going to pass, I think it really varies depending on your awareness level. I think, like a lot of, say, Buddhists might be able to determine and know the day or the hour of their death. They just are so in tune, they know that that's what it is. There's a lot of people, especially in the US, but actually everywhere, who are really not very aware at all. And so I think they're not aware of anything, let alone their own, their own, like, am I on the earth plane? Am I heading to the departed plane? They don't even know they're on the earth plane. They're just not aware.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that actually brings me to a question that I've been wondering for so long, and I think you might be able to address it. So my grandma, when she was really sick and close to her death, she really wanted to go. She was in pain, as I think a lot of people that are hospitalized at the end of their lives are. She knew that things weren't going to get any better, as, again, many people in that situation know. So she was praying constantly to go, and she was asking me to pray as well with her, which I did, because I also thought that would be best for her. My question is, do you have any kind of influence when you say, oh, please God, just take me, like, I'm so done, like, please just do that? Does that matter in any way at all?
I think it matters if you are aligned with what the universe has planned already. That's again that question, like, we're not in charge. And you don't really know for your grandmother if at the very last moment she had some understanding that if she had gone earlier, she wouldn't have been able to have. You don't know. Or if there was some reason that she needed time to think about, whatever she needed to review. It's really interesting though, because on the other side of that is, when we're born, like, when do we're probably in another realm deciding we're going to come in, and like, I wonder if we get to choose when the moment we enter into our lives. I don't know. The other thing I want to add is, I believe we're not only living in this dimension, so say your grandmother may have been living in multiple parallel realities, just as we all do, I think. And maybe there was unfinished business in another dimension that she needed to take care of, or maybe something needed to be prepared for her if she were going to reincarnate a certain way. Obviously, I don't have the handbook on this, so I don't know. And nobody knows, anyone who tells you they don't know either. So I just don't know.
Yeah, no, but it's so interesting, I think, to talk about these things, because I think generally people are just so limited in what they believe and how they see it. And I think by trying to understand a bit more and deepening our knowledge spiritually and about what can happen on the other side, I think it allows us a broader perspective of what life is, first of all.
Yeah. I was watching this silly movie, it was a comedy recently, and in the movie, I don't remember what it's called, but they believe in that the earth is flat, and they also believe that the earth is held up on the back of like an elephant and a turtle or something like that. And we laugh about that, but honestly our beliefs now in terms of religion or science, we're going to laugh about that too very soon. We do not understand how it is. We just don't.
Exactly. Yeah, I also always think of it just like the flat earth, like at one point that was just common knowledge, and you would have been considered insane for even suggesting that it could be round, right? Because then people would just fall off. And now we just laugh at this, but then there's so many things that we don't know. And I always say it, especially when we have people with very strong views in the comments, I'll say, well, how do you know that that's the truth? Like, if you're so keen to argue that this isn't true or that another reality is true, like, how do you know for sure? How do you have that certainty?
Right.
Because we rarely do, and I think we need to be a bit more humble in our beliefs. Like, we can learn, we can believe, we can think, And we can be pretty damn sure, but 100%, that's quite tough.
I think when all of this happened for me, all this opening, one thing that was pretty weird is that, like, nowadays there's so many books on, you know, psychic awakening, channeling, NDEs. There probably were books then, but it's like almost like I was blocked from any resource. It was like it was hidden from me, and my only way of learning was meditating and journeying. And I didn't work with a teacher or a system or a practice. I just experimented. And I actually think that's the best way we can all understand what we believe, is by trying different things and seeing what happens. Going into, and by journey, I don't mean like an ayahuasca journey or a psilocybin journey. I just mean going into meditation and going and traveling deeply with your guides or whatever beings are going to show up to reveal things to you. Like what is in there when we explore? It's so fascinating to me. And what I've been receiving most recently is this continuous idea from the guides about we're just particulate. They don't even say cells, or they just say it's all the particulate is conscious, the consciousness agrees to create form, and all of these other ideas that you have are really don't matter, because that's all it is just a bunch of consciousness making agreement to present this reality. And this is not just matter, but time and space. It's all dimensions all at once. So how do we put a handle on that? Like when we're trying to make our coffee, I don't know, but sometimes having the bigger idea leads us on the path to shifting the mundane in our lives.
So you mentioned parallel realities or parallel lives earlier on. And that's a concept that I have to say I don't fully grasp. Also because I think of time, I think in a very standard, simple way of thinking of it. As in, we're in the present, there's the past and there's the future. How do you think of parallel lives, and how do you see it? And what does that mean for the time that we're experiencing?
Well, I have not seen that movie. It's Everything Happens All at Once. But I do think that that title is exactly the way that I think of things. I don't think of time in a very standard way anymore. I think once we get more capable, we'll be almost able to bend time or extend it or shorten it. Like we'll be able to work with it as an energy field. Also, I don't know how to do this, but I have had experiences where, you know, like time stops, or you just suddenly, you only have 3 minutes, but suddenly you have all the time you need. And I think that when you start to journey and go, it almost, so sometimes I work with the idea that we're in this one particular river of flow, that's our lives, that we experience. Right next to that, there's another river and another river. There's infinite rivers. And we're on all of these rivers all at once, experiencing different outcomes. Like maybe in this one, you and I are talking. In the next river over, you're talking to me yesterday. In the next river over, we never spoke. In the next river over, we're asking different questions. In the next river over, our past lives are talking to each other, you know, who we were. In the next river over, our future lives are talking. So I think consciousness doesn't have any limits on it. It doesn't chop up into matter and time and space. So it's just, you know, oneness all at once. And again, it's a big idea, but we do have to live in the world that we've all agreed upon, which has all these rules about time or what have you.
I love that. And it will take me a minute to wrap my head around it, but I love your explanation of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just think also, like even before COVID, we didn't really even have Zoom. I mean, we had Zoom, but it wasn't really an understood concept. What we're actually doing is a kind of visual telepathy with Zoom. Right now we're using this computer or phone or whatever we're using, but in several years we won't need that to connect. We'll be able to just bring in the visualization in third eye and be in telepathy that way. It's not here yet, but these tools of our phones and other things are teaching us how to have telepathy with each other over distance. Eventually we won't need the tools the same way. We're not there yet, but it will happen, I believe.
But do you think technology, if I understand you correctly, is helping us develop our skills as well, so we reach that point?
Yes, I think so. I think probably we couldn't, I mean, just think the old phones had to have wires and, wire lines. Then we had the mobile, then we had, so with every step we're getting more and more free, that we just accept this idea that we can talk over time and space. We didn't know we could do that 30 years ago, or I don't know when. The phone was like a big deal when it came, or we didn't have the idea that we could have cars. It's just like the technology changes it, and then our understanding changes it.
Right, so then you think technology will find a way to enhance that, and not so much it will be within ourselves?
I think that we will learn to do everything without technology over time. Even things like, when you are reading an article or watching a video and then there's the comments below. So that's interesting because the comments are now giving us almost like the view of the collective. It may not be the whole collective, but we didn't have that level of interaction or feedback with other souls all at once. And that's just like, if you want to know the pulse of what people are thinking, at some level you can just start reading a bunch of comments on everything and see, like, what are most people thinking? It's very interesting. It's new. That's a new thing. Not always welcome. I might add to the people that I have to block, but that's just what it is. Yeah.
That's true. And I have to say, I do love it, because that's the feedback, right? Like, this is how you learn. And I read for my own benefit, or sometimes stress at night, but I read each and every comment. And I think it's definitely more helpful, because then you get a global idea of what the audience in this case, or the collective, the community actually wants and expects. So yeah, I think it's amazing that we can give our own 2 cents on everything. I do think not everybody should have a right to.
Yeah, you want to be contributing, not tearing down, if possible.
I'm not sure who said that, but there was a podcaster, I think, that said there should be a 10 push-up rule before you write a hateful comment.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. But, we're seeing everyone suffering, right? That's the other thing that comes out, is like, look at the suffering, look at the anger, the rage. This is also what people are feeling. And so this shows us like the pulse of how people are doing. Not that great a lot of times. Yeah.
So tell me more about how this spiritual awakening has led you to the path of doing what you do today.
Well, I think that spiritual awakening made me see, or helped me to see, everything from the lens of the soul, not the lens of, I call it as one word, like the mind, ego, personality. Not that I don't have, problems with my ego, just like everyone, or problems with my personality, but it really kept saying, like, the soul is the most important. Consciousness is all that matters. The mind, ego, personality is very temporary and easily swayed. The body is never going to lie to you, but it's a limited, finite being. And so this continued focus on what is the soul answer here, or what is the bigger answer here, or what is the infinite answer? And I don't know, you just go from this smaller view to this really expanded view on everything. Like, yeah, just even the small things, like, does it really matter what a person's moral code is? Like, maybe, but maybe not. Does it matter how people behave? I'm not sure it's for ours to judge. Like, and it's not the same as spiritual bypassing, which is a very common idea now. We don't just say, everything is horrible here in my life, I'm just going to go work with my guides or ask the angels. That is not what it is at all. It's really saying there's all this suffering in the world, and what are the bigger answers? And then we start to look at ourselves as connected, conscious beings, infinite beings, attempting to evolve as a whole, as opposed to just little personalities running around.
That's an unbelievable mission that you're on.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm not the only one, right? Like, there's there's so many people attempting to sort of lift up humanity, like lots of different ways. I mean, doctors might be doing it, artists might be doing it, dancers, musicians, regular people doing regular stuff. I mean, we all have our unique way of contributing to lifting up suffering, transcending suffering.
For sure. So tell me, how can people find you and your work?
I am in Portland, Oregon. So for those who are in Europe or other places, I'm on the west coast of the US. And you can go to sarawiseman.com. I do a channeled forecast every month, which is pretty interesting. And then I also have lots and lots of low-cost courses for anyone who wants to learn spiritual intuition.
That's amazing. And your monthly, did you say monthly forecast?
Mm-hmm.
Is it about the state of the world or what you perceive as happening?
I channel from the guides, and it's about, they call it the quality of time as we're experiencing it now, like what to pay attention to now. It's not astrological, it's just through channeling. And especially in the US now, like we're heading toward election at the time of this recording in a few months. So I haven't channeled that yet, but I'm very curious as to what, if any guidance there will be on that. Or maybe it doesn't matter as much as we think. You know, we're all very focused on this marker here, and maybe it's not important. I'm not sure yet. I have to wait for further information from the guides and see.
Yeah, I'm really curious because, right, like we tend to think like when we have elections or something like this or like COVID, we think, well, it's the biggest deal ever. It's a huge, massive deal. I don't want to sound like one of the candidates, but like you would think, oh, that's like so important, right? But I'm always curious if in the grand scheme of things, it actually makes a difference. If say the other worldly beings would also see it like this.
Yeah, I would think that it doesn't make a difference. I would think that I want people to vote, but I would think that we really can't control how things are in the world, and everything that is happened is agreed upon by the collective at some level. And so it's just like where we are in terms of our evolution and understanding, that's where the reality will be. We're creating this in agreement with each other, even if we don't like how it is sort of what the collective is saying. Yeah, in 200 years, today won't matter that much, or This is why our infinite nature is so important. It gives us the bigger picture.
So it was 1977. I was 8 years old, so post-Vietnam War. I was growing up in a household where I wasn't protected, and I was actually spotted as an unprotected child and abducted by a man, a white American man, who took me out of the country. And again, 1977, there wasn't even child protective services in place in most states in the United States at that time. So people ask, how did he get you out of the country? And I say, quite easily. And so when I became conscious, I didn't know that I was in the middle of a civil war, and it was the height of the Rhodesian Civil War. Rhodesia is now Zimbabwe. And so my life was in extreme danger from this abductor. He was psychopath and really had the potential to kill me at any moment. And so he assaulted me, broke my ribs, and I thought that was going to be my crossing. And I was literally praying to the angels to come get me because I was so exhausted and disappointed and fatigued from all the hard experiences I had up until that point in my life at 8 years old. But the angel came down and told me, it's not your time. And I said, I want a new angel, because don't you see how bad this is down here? So I did survive that. I was hospitalized. And again, I'm going to make it the short version because I've actually written my book. So it's all, I'll show you the cover, Loving Bravely. So all the detail is here. So I'm going to try not to do too much of a spoiler. And so I was immersed in this war. I ended up being picked up by some very dangerous soldiers. One of those soldiers chose to take me to a village that he thought might take me in and give me some shelter. And so he dropped me off in the bush by myself. In the morning, I made my way to the people of this village. And this is the part that I really want to get across to people, that they didn't have to take me in. You know, I was not of their nationality, I was not of their race, I didn't speak their language, but they chose to give me shelter, to give me water and food, and two women in particular really chose to give me loving and mothering. And so I really want to bring that home for people, because a big part of why I share my death experiences is to share the love, because so many people are needing more feminine nurturing, more mothering in the world. So when the woman who kind of became my mama, when she was taking me in, of course I was a very defended child, and I was afraid of anybody hurting me, but she sang to me. And it's through this singing that I began to melt some of my high defendedness. So my singing is different than hers, but I'm going to try to deliver some of the love that she gave to me to you all. And the invitation is to let this sink into the places inside you that need to be seen, that need to have somebody say, you are loved, you are real, you matter. So imagine again, I'm this desperate, barely alive 8-year-old, and she's singing to me in this potent, dignified, loving way. And so I literally collapse in her arms. And I think this is my new life, living with these people, and they start teaching me the ways of planting in the ground, harvesting food, doing ceremony. And I don't understand the magnitude of the danger that we are in this civil war. And so what's true is that it's a very complex civil war. There's 3 factions. And that if people, civilians, rural people, didn't agree with some of the more extreme side, they were considered the enemy and attacked. So one day I wandered too close to an area where, unbeknownst to me, a battle was starting to happen. And so to me it was a positive place. It was a creek where the women had put clay on my assaulted, bruised ribs, and they asked me to sing with them. And when I could sing with them, they considered that I was going to be well. That singing, that moving, that dancing is part of human resilience. And so that was the medicine of how they helped me heal the trauma of having been abducted and assaulted, is to sing with them. So again, I'm just going to put as much singing as I can in here. Shumneam, oh, so singing to people's strength, to people's resilience, and that so many people have made it through hardship, and not always have we been given a moment of recognition. So that's what I'm pausing and doing right now, is honoring all the hard things that each of us have lived through, the losses, the disappointments, the betrayals, the places where that which we thought was stable is broken in pieces in front of us. And so breathing in, breathing out your dignity, your resilience. So returning to my story, again, I was by this creek that was a positive place for me, and there was a soldier, and he was scouting the perimeter. And when he spotted me, a child by myself, obviously I had no defense, no weapon, and he immediately pulled up his gun. And when his gun barrel became just a circle, I knew this is my last moment alive. This is my last breath. And in my heart, I was begging him for mercy. But now I understand the generational context, that mercy wasn't available in his heart, and that it was immediate, that he was so close I could see his finger on the trigger. He pulled the trigger, and I heard the gun go off, and the bullet scraped and grazed the top of my head. I got slammed down to the ground, and I began to die of blood loss. I crossed over into a very loving, gentle, supportive, and totally guided place. And so the first beings who touched me on the other side were these very feminine beings. And I now understand it was the 2 women who mothered me in the village. They were still alive at the time. So that raises all kinds of interesting questions about, is part of us already on the other side? So they guided me. I ended up going through to another guide who guided me through some of what I call my dark cave. And in order to go forward and reunite with what I call the Great Heart, the being that sung me into presence, sung my life into being, I needed to purify all the beliefs where I thought that I wasn't good enough, and that I thought the abuse that had happened to me was my fault. So this guide in my dark cave helped me address, to sit with all those difficult emotions that happened in my 8 years of being alive. And so that purified me to go on, and other beings kept literally passing through me, taking away any shame, taking any misconception that I was unworthy or something was wrong with me. So again, I'm going to sing to that. Any place that listeners have where there's shame, where there's embarrassment for not being able to be perfect or be what other people expected. So healing that shame into knowing that the Creator made you just as you are. Shune ayam ho I ahiye showo hey I am nam hey yo. And may that singing increase your self-acceptance, just like I experienced when I was on the other side. And so I had the opportunity to get closer and closer to the Great Heart, again, the source that created me. And I was getting ready to merge back home, to be a drop in the ocean of goodness, of spiritual source. And just before I was ready to merge, I heard singing. And I turned my attention backwards in the tunnel where I had come from this earthly realm. And my mama had found my body. She was stopping the blood flow on my head. And she had changed her wailing into singing. And then she called on the ancestors in the land to sing a calling song so potent that it was attempting to call me back. And what happened in this critical turning point is that when I heard their calling song, I remembered I had not yet done my purpose, which was to sing to others, to call them through their trauma resolution, to call them through their shame back to their wholeness, just as she was doing for me. So I had a choice. I could continue on to the Great Heart, and I'm going to lean and show you some of my art behind me, so that tunnel, that place where we can reunite with Source, or I could turn around and come back to this lifetime. And I chose to come back to sing. And here's where I'm going to slow down and really emphasize what it was like to turn around and head back towards life. And so first I was heading back from this etheric, soft, loving place and starting to return to my body that of course was so injured. And I started to regret my choice. But I met a being, and again in my 8 years old, I met beings as I could receive them. And so this being I met, and she had a cat, a golden cougar face. And she told me, we have so much art that when you are safe, and this will take a long time before you are safe, we are going to give you art image after image so that you can draw things to help yourself and others remember their belonging in the web of life, that they are created by original source, and that creation comes from goodness. So she reassured me that someday I would be safe, and someday they would begin to give me all this art. And again, this is my art printed on a towel behind me. And I continued on, and there I was at the border between the living and the dead, the final veil. So again, kind of if we keep going out in these veils, I was at the final veil, ready to return home. And there I met what I call the grandmother of all of us, the original mother. And her skin was black, and her eyes were all colors. So she just kept shifting. And she sang to me as if I was a cathedral. And she was singing this song of prayer, this song of celebration, saying, I'm so glad you were created, and I'm so glad you're returning back to life. So I'm going to sing again to everyone who's listening, who maybe didn't get the proper cherishing when they were born. Maybe your parents were tired or confused, or there was generational stuckness or trauma, and people around you didn't know how to celebrate you coming into this lifetime. So I'm singing to that to heal that. Shwe ai, Shoei-yo, shoei-ya-ya-yo, shoei-ai, shoei-yo, shoei-am, yeah-yo. So with that, the final veil opened. I came back to my body. My mama was holding on to me. She helped me feel more solid. The people of the village that I was in sang prayers to get the hatred off the bullet that grazed my head, so I wouldn't go through life with resentment. And so that someday I could understand the whole context of why these intense experiences happened, and the historical context and my karmic context of why I went from being a white American born on the East Coast to the unusual circumstances that landed me in a place where I received mothering from these women, and that also several men took the risk to protect and save my life. And they didn't have to do this. So part of why I wrote the book, Loving Bravely, is to honor the people who took the risk. And so I'm singing a hymn of praise. And I made sure, as in the writing, it took me 16 years to write this book, that I wrote all the parts where they loved me so slow, so rich, so it could be like instructions on how to receive love. And I wrote the intense trauma parts as simply and gently as I could, because I wanted it to be friendly to other trauma survivors. And so I don't go for shock value, I don't go for gruesome value, I go for what is loving kindness that can come off the page and meet the many people who could use some more compassion in their lives, who could use some reminder of how to take good care of themselves with self-compassion. So the next parts that happened that are quite tragic are that the soldiers came back, attacked the village. When I was running to escape this second attack, I had just been shot 2 days before. I still had died of blood loss, so I was incredibly weak. So I didn't make it very far in trying to escape before I fell face down in the sand and crossed over again. And this death experience was quite different. And again, it's I want to really share kind of the essential nuggets of it. And that this being I met, I called him God of mountains become beaches, because he showed me that he could create the mountains. He could also destroy them in slides, grain by grain. And that his key message to me, again, after I had just experienced a massacre, that out of destruction comes new creation, meaning that which we thought was solid, like a mountain, can be taken apart over time, grain by grain, and it makes the beach. So when we think it's the dark night of our soul, when we are convinced we can't go on, those are the times that something might be broken open to send us in a new direction. That we might have been thrown 100 miles off the route we thought we were on, the way we thought our life was going to unfold. And that when we stand up again in our resilience, in our dignity, then we begin again. That is the definition of resilience, is taking stock what we've lost and looking around for what we do have, which might just be resilience inside of ourselves. And I'm going to sing again to honoring our ability to stand up again. Shoei hi om nayam hey yo. So this being, that I now understand to be Shiva. He returned me to my body, and I didn't want to live, but he commanded me to live. And so he literally commanded me to crawl forward to get away from the massacre. And he had the plan, and so he commanded me to crawl to a place that was a well. So in the morning, somebody else would come to gather water. And I now know, since I've been back twice to Zimbabwe, that this woman's name was Mia Lucy, which means Mother of Lucy. And she found me half dead. She washed the blood off my face. She put me on her back as if I was her own child. She took me back to her homestead. And when a neighbor saw she had a wounded white child, they said, "Don't bother with her, it's too dangerous." And she said, and this is why I am alive, "I will not throw her away. She's a living human being." And so again, everything I do is to honor the loving, bravely courage of the people who chose to save my life during war. And in my research, about 24,000 civilians died in this war. And the reason I am not one of them is because of their choice to take me in. And I've been back, again, like I said twice, like 40 years after the war. And I've been able to find people who remember me. And they all say, your chances of survival, a white child alone in that war, are nothing. But it's God's grace that you are still here with us. So again, just honoring everybody's ways of surviving, and especially honoring people who have taken the risk to reach out and help somebody who maybe wasn't part of their family, wasn't part of their kin, but went beyond separation, beyond familiarity. Because the people who saved people's lives during the Holocaust, they said it didn't matter that they weren't part of my family, part of my religion, that they were a human being. And that's why I gave them shelter during the Holocaust. So whatever small act, whatever continuous act, whatever momentary act we can do to spread generosity of giving each other shelter, saying, "I see you," with a look of warmth, a smile, truly can change lives. And that's, again, my big message of what are the ways we can be kinder to ourselves? Because if we weren't taken care of as children, if we were abandoned, neglected, assaulted, oppressed, it is 10 times more important that we take good care of ourselves as an adult, through how we eat, through who we spend time with, for how much we get out in nature, how much we move our body, and that attending to our nervous system health, our adrenal health, that we're the ones who are in charge to make this big shift of not passing on trauma, but resolving it here, letting the generational trauma stop here by committing to taking responsibility for our lives, for our emotional states, and for our physical health. So I will pause there and let you continue the conversation.
I find it so remarkable that these people that did not know you were very different from them, chose to help you, which is very difficult to do, especially as they were in the middle of a war. So, it's a fight or flight kind of a situation. You're focusing on protecting yourself, protecting your family, and yet so many people have found it in their heart to try their best to shelter you and to save your life. When you looked nothing like them, you probably did not understand each other with words, and you were just a child. So I think it's impressive, how much we can find humanity everywhere, and it doesn't matter where you're from or where we're going. But I also find it quite remarkable that, you know, you were a small child, so you must have been terrified from beginning to end. It must have been horrendous, and yet you focus a lot on the loving that was shown to you, and the protection that you were given, instead of, you know, the lesser nice parts of your experience.
And it took decades to get where I am now, and that my 20s into my 30s, that's kind of all I did. I didn't actually have a lot of fun. I didn't have a regular 20-year-old kind of freestyle life. I just went to therapy, and I went to inpatient trauma treatment programs, and I got body work, I did yoga, I tried to recover my adrenal health. So where I'm at now, like right now I'm 55, and so what you're seeing, how I present, the ability to sing, the ability to move in my body, feel joy, do art, it took devoted years of just doing trauma resolution. So if you talked to me when I was 25, I was angry, and I was so full of stress and cortisol. My body was in pain a lot. So I just want to honor every person's journey along the way. And once I got to a certain point at about 35 years old in my own trauma resolution, I really wanted to turn that around and give back. Because the ultimate, in my opinion, the ultimate act of coming full circle in our own trauma is giving back to others. Because it's healing to us to feel the agency of, now I have something to serve. Whatever that looks like, community service, running groups, you know, quiet, being the cook in the kitchen at a, at a youth troubled home, whatever it is, whether it's up front and public like I am, or whether it's behind the scenes, the sooner you're able, even when you're not done. Like at 35, I went to massage school, I started getting trauma resolution training to help others, and I wasn't done my process by any means, but I still was able to turn around and give back. I became a craniopsychotherapist, and I really cultivated the gifts I have been given, which my intuition was broken open after the war in Africa. I actually had several more death experiences from assault and from the stress of so much abuse. My body just literally was shutting down and going into parasympathetic shock. And in my teen years, like the post-traumatic stress was just exploding in my body and my nervous system. So wherever people are in their, whether they haven't started in their trauma resolution, whether they're still living the post-traumatic stress symptoms, that even a breath in and a breath out can be medicine. And that we didn't experience the trauma alone, unless it was a natural disaster. Most of the time, people's trauma is from other people. And it's from, unfortunately, a lot of times their caregivers. So while our trust might be incredibly damaged, the key to healing is to find people that you do feel good with and do your resolution work with other people in community. And so that's again why I love to offer groups. I do work with people to help them in their trauma resolution, and I love helping other near-death experiencers integrate the experience, because it's a lot to integrate. For those of us who had it as a child and then had to repress it, it might take many years. For me, I went back to Zimbabwe 40 years after the war, because that's when I was ready. I couldn't really have gone any sooner. So whatever methodologies of healing, of taking responsibility for your life, that is the key to freedom, to creative health, to joy. And a lot of people might have heard of the ACEs score, which is an indicator of how much adverse childhood experience we had. And obviously there's studies that that show if people don't do their trauma resolution, then it's more likely that they have diabetes, heart attacks, die sooner, have all kinds of stress-related illnesses. So again, that's my loving invitation to take your next step forward. And what I want to say too is that talk therapy isn't for everyone. Either it's not your culture, or it's out of the price reach. So that's why community dance, drumming, doing art, there's peer support groups, there's 12-step groups. So if it's small, if it's big, your invitation to take your next step in your journey of healing. And, the truth is it's long and hard depending on the amount of trauma you had. And it's entirely worth it.
Oh, absolutely. One thing that I don't quite understand about your time in Africa is why would someone kidnap an American child in the US and take them to Africa? Did that happen regularly at that time? And what was the purpose of it? What was their intention?
Mm-hmm. So first thing I'm going to say is that those of us who are reasonably mentally well won't really understand the thought process of a psychopath. So that's the first premise. And so I asked the same questions, and it was a lot of source of pain about why was I abducted? So I'm just going to answer first on a karmic level. So from a karmic level, I have had many readings that I have more lifetimes in a tribal context than I have in kind of like a more urban context. So I believe my soul was already with the people of this village. So the crazy circumstances that reunited me with them was what I think my karma. And then my karma is to be the storyteller. So as best as I know from my research and my going back, all of them died in that first village. And so Shiva has told me, it's your kind of privilege to tell the story of their love. And so that's again why, I'm a white American who was in these unusual circumstances, and I have the privilege to be able to write a book and to get it published. And so, otherwise a lot of them wouldn't be known or spoken of in a way that other people could find. So on a worldly level, about why did this happen? So the Vietnam War happened, and the Rhodesian War was just a little bit later. And so the amount of child abduction in both of those wars was incredibly huge numbers. And that in the Rhodesian War, abducting a white girl was a war strategy. And because then it would make the white people, the white colonizers, leave the country, because if their children weren't safe, then they were motivated to leave. In the Vietnam War, not only did lots of child abduction happen, but also a lot of the white American soldiers fathered a child with Vietnamese women, whether consensual or not, meaning like assault or not. And so I believe the abductor fathered a child there, and then they had to, when they left, when they got sent back to the US, they had to leave that child behind. So what he kept saying to me was, why can't you be more like her? And so I think in his mind he was kind of getting a daughter to replace the daughter he had to leave behind. Again, I don't think he had thought it through. He was just kind of like, I'm going to go back to war, therefore I'm going to get a daughter to take me back to war. Meaning that he took me with him on the flight. Again, my research is that his training was about 5 to 7 days before he had to go into the field, and so he just gave me to another man. I don't think he thought it through about what am I going to do with her once I have to go into the field. So he just gave me to another man, and then that man left me in the bush, and that's when I was found by the other soldiers. So the key to understand that can be hard for non-war survivors is understanding the magnitude of the chaos that happens in war. And so when I was writing the book, this 24-hour time period, so much intense activity happened that is 5 chapters of the whole book, and within 24 hours. And so those who have been through something that's on an epic scale, like a hurricane or, God forbid, a shooting, you understand that in 5 minutes, your entire world can change. And so war is a context where every 5 minutes, everything can be turned upside down. So when people are trying to understand from a situation of not having been through something like that, it can seem like, how could this possibly happen? But when I went back to Zimbabwe, everybody there said, oh, this makes perfect sense, that all of this happened to you, and that the chaos of, being tossed from one person to another in these situations, and that it's, we can live or die in a moment in these chaotic situations. So I believe it's divine source so that I could come back and create the art and deliver a message of we can be good to each other even in war. We can be good to each other through race relations. We can cultivate equality by giving experiences of belonging. So again, each moment that we can even make eye contact with somebody who maybe is outcasted, just to say, I see your humanity, that is loving bravely.
You have such a beautiful message, and to me, hearing this side of war, it opens up a new perspective. Because usually, for instance, we have wars going on in our world now, and we tend to hear who attacked what, the victims. You get this sort of digest version of what happened. But rarely do we ever get to know of these details, like, for instance, child abductions. The suffering, we assume suffering happened. But those day by day or hour by hour activities that happen are so unknown to us that it's, on the one hand, I think it's a blessing, because I think it would traumatize us to know everything that goes on in a war. And on the other hand, I think we're just oblivious to these dark things that could be happening to almost anybody at any given time.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's the beauty of sharing these, is giving hope. Like, again, I wrote this book to be of service to my brother and sister war survivors. And, whether that's this lifetime or our ancestors, and everybody who just needs more compassion in the world. And I want to move to also that the things that get opened in people when they go through something that's beyond the normal human experience, that we can find out what we're made of. And so speaking about these things is incredibly important to the integration and the transformation. So for me, intuition got opened. And so I use that to be of service to others. And so the intuition, and again, the further I went in emptying my nervous system of trauma, the more space there was for my brain, my being, my senses to read intuitively. And so mine works that I don't see auras or angels, but I see biology. I see people's organs. I see people's emotional history in relation to their physical state. And so I work with people about like when I very first started kind of realizing that, I could look at people and see, oh, in this area of your body, there's still that fear of, when your dad lost his job and the family was really not able to have enough food. And so at a certain point I said, well, I need more anatomy and biology and physiology training to understand how does that show up as far as a disease process or a health risk for people. So that's really the emphasis of my training, is the neurobiology of trauma resolution. And I also at a certain point really started looking for people's strengths and gifts, like what are people's brilliances? Like, that's super fun. Sometimes I'll see a teenager and just see what an incredible leadership potential they have. And I can just see inside their mind how unique their thinking is to bring together two things in the world that have never been combined, and how that's going to be of service to their community. So shifting our nervous system to look for the good and not just scanning the horizon looking for danger. And that's the beauty of trauma resolution. And again, just my early art was all just kind of dumping trauma out of my body so it wasn't in my cells. And a bunch of it's not very pretty. And then at a certain point, it started to not be about my story, but about the collective story, and about the ways that we interweave and into the golden web of life, and that I could bring forward the positive of my near-death experiences. And again, most of us near-deathers, we want to have you, people who haven't had a death experience, get the benefit of the difficulty that ended up opening the beauty. I don't recommend being shot. I don't recommend being in a car accident. I recommend meditation. I recommend Tai Chi, dropping into all kinds of spiritual practices that deepen you into sensation and embodiment. I'm not a huge fan of things that are just ascension, because for trauma survivors, that can be an excuse to dissociate, to disconnect. So I'm a huge fan of like all kinds of things that help you come home to your organs, to your heart, to your breath.
So you've spoken a lot about the time that it has taken you to work through the trauma and to be able to integrate not just the near-death experience, but everything that happened, and coming back and trying to make sense of it and working to being able to move forward with your life. You've also mentioned that it took you 16 years to write the book. And I know writing a book is not only a difficult and painful process, but in order to write those events and recall your memories with accuracy, you need to tap into moments where 8-year-old you was extremely scared and horrified. How did that process work for you, and how did you manage to not give into those feelings again when you had to resurface them in the process of writing?
Mm-hmm. So again, the beginning was not a pretty process at all. I thought I was just going to write a couple pages that were going to go into another book. And I gave those couple of pages to a person who really invested a lot of years in helping me write the book. And he said, "Tell us more. This is important, but you haven't told us the emotion." And again, I'm always loving, encouraging other people's gifts and creative process. So if you think it's, a short project and it's going to take you a little bit, I thought maybe it would take me like, a year. At 5 years, somebody asked me, "When are you going to be done?" I'm like, "I think another year." And staying with it, staying when it's a mess, just staying with it, because it started out as 7 pages. And then this person asked me for more, and it became 15 pages. And then it became 46 pages. And then I started giving it out to other people. And so again, I involved so many people in the process of writing this book. And I just want to say too, it's on audiobook that I did the narration, and I sing in the audiobook. And the physical book has my visual art in it. And so in the process, I gave it out to about 45 beta readers. And so beta readers refers to like people who are just going to give you feedback even though they know it's not a polished book. And so I gave it to people who would praise it. I gave it to people who would tell me what wasn't working. I gave it to people who would just ask me, "Did someone bathe you?" And And so the book got written by people asking me questions, by people interviewing me, like, really, what happened with this being in your near death that was different than the first being you met? So I gave it to I had about 9 professional editors. So it cost me a lot. I really invested a great deal in this book and the audiobook and the artwork, but it's my life's work. It's my thank you to the people who saved my life, and it's the paying forward, and the feedback I've been getting is so humbling. People have told me one person told me it's the most important book that they will have read in their life. And I just have to pause and say the 16 years were worth it. So if you've set aside your book, and it's the ultimate, if you decide you're just writing it for yourself and maybe for a few people and you want to keep it private, that's fine. If you decide, like me, that this is public and that this is of service to many people that I'll never even meet. One person wrote to me from Siberia and said, "Your voice has made it all the way here to Siberia, and I feel the potency of your healing here." So when I get that kind of feedback, that kind of encouragement, that kind of invitation to keep doing more, like I've recorded my singing medicine. I have a music album out called Roots Drinking Rain. And again, it's to deliver love through my voice to people. And it's not for everyone, but for those it means something to, for those who it lands to, I get really strong feedback about what it means to them and their healing and their embodiment and their decreasing their shame and increasing their dignity.
And who is this book for when you were writing it? Who did you write it for? And what was the core message that you wanted to convey to them?
Mm-hmm. I wrote it for everyone who needs mothering. I wrote it for everyone who needs a role model that you can rise up, that your innate human quality to be flattened and stand up again is there. And I wrote it for people who live in a place that's oppressive and that they can just kind of take this book off somewhere that nobody else is maybe going to know, and it's going to give them validation of their strength. And again, I wrote the trauma parts as gently as possible. So, wherever people are, and the beauty of an ebook, of course, is that people can translate it to read it in their language. So I wrote it for people who don't have community, to be able to kind of vicariously have the community that I did rise off the page and be loving to them. Because we have so many negative role models of how people use power. There's nothing wrong with power itself, but when we have so many thousands of huge role models of people misusing power, then power and abuse gets coupled together. And so let's uncouple those two things and have more stories of people using their power in a good way. Because, I'm not a huge physical person. I'm a woman who is in my power. I gave a craniosacral session to a young man once who had, he had many concussions because he had done, he was a fire jumper, which means they dropped them from a plane and they jumped right into the fire and worked to put the fire out. So he said, "Robin, I have had very strong male role models of men in command, and that is one kind of power. But," he said, "receiving these sessions from you and treating all my concussions and my nervous system," he said, "you have a power that's entirely different than these men in command." So, if you're a feminine person, if you're a small-bodied person, if you're a person who's experienced oppression, you are powerful. And I'm going to sing right now to that power. Show hey yo, he am ne And the time of playing small is a luxury we can't afford anymore. That we need people to show up in their power, show up in their strength, to clear out what you need to clear so your voice can come to the table. And even if there's still oppression barriers along the way, then be with the people who are safe. Be with the community where your voice isn't oppressed, so that you can build up strength in safety, and then you can choose what you do with your creative expression, with your abilities to organize. Whatever your gift is, we need it now.
It's a very beautiful message to end on, and I think your book is very much what we need right now. It's definitely something that we should all be reading and learning from, because I think we could all use more nurturing. We can all use, more community in our lives, especially nowadays where it feels like we're as divided as can be, according to the media at least. So Robin, for everybody that wants to get in touch with you or find out more about your art, your book, your sessions, how can they get in touch with you and how can they find your work?
Thanks for asking, Sabrina. So my website is my name, robinlandsong.com, and there's 5-person groups. Right now I have individual sessions, I have classes on generational healing, embodiment, creativity, and also I'm so excited. We're making more and more of my art available, and I want to make it affordable for people and usable for people. So there's towels and blankets and sweatshirts, and there are prints too for those who do want to have a print on your wall. And so that is a lovely way to help me out also as an artist and a professional intuitive and healer, because like I say, I spent quite a bit of money making this, which was a totally strong choice that I made to invest in the world and goodness in the world. So I would love your support through buying my art, and I would love to work with people who are really ready to take their next step, even if you don't know how to heal. That's what I help people with, is how do I take my next step in my self-care, my self-compassion, and my freeing up my nervous system so you're capable of more health and freedom. So again, robinlandsong.com, and you can also look me up on Facebook and Instagram, and I have lots and lots of YouTube videos. So if people aren't able to afford a session, you can go through my YouTube videos and get lots of learning and teachings that way also.